former fellow of the CSNS back in, I think, 2008. Uh, Basically been involved in the CSNS since that time. I'm currently the treasurer of the CSNS. So I'm going to hit the highlights here of the resolution process, kind of what it is, what it entails, what its purpose is. This will not be the most exhaustive talk. You do not want an hour-long talk on resolutions. That would be very boring. But we're going to hit the highlights of that and then kind of get into maybe a little bit of the pearls of writing them and kind of getting involved in that process. I'm going to share my screen here, so give me just a second and see if I can do this maybe. All right, here we go. So the CSNS is really not your typical neurosurgery meeting. A lot of those are ones where you'll sit in basically an audience or some type of lecture format, and you'll hear somebody just talk about whatever topic or subject they have. Some of the, in my 30 years of experience type talks, which can be interesting, but can, sometimes be a little boring too. The CSNS is a little different because it's something we like to call working meetings. So really, it's not just sitting and listening to lectures, although you'll hear a few, reports and things like that of research, but it's really about getting a lot of things done. Debating proposals, completing projects, generating ideas and things to help improve and advance neurosurgery from a socioeconomic standpoint. So, something different, and it's time to really get to work with these things. And one of the primary ways that the CSNS accomplishes its goals is through the resolution process. It's an integral and important part of our organization, one that as we've had more and more things added, things we want to do, things required of us, that we've really worked on, keeping available and open and having there at the heart of our organization, because this is kind of the lifeblood of what we do. One of the things that we kind of pride ourselves on is being the conduit for anybody to get their ideas or opinions in front of the leadership of neurosurgery. And this is really the way it can be done, better than any other in neurosurgery. So this is the formal definition of a resolution. It is much like a bill in Congress. It is a proposal to accomplish, change, or study a specific issue within primarily socioeconomics of neurosurgery. Of course, the term socioeconomics is extremely broad, and we've kept opening that term and expanding that term over the last couple of decades. It includes coding. It includes business things like entrepreneurship, practice management. It includes legal aspects, medical practices, work situations, safety, wellness. All of these things are included in the socioeconomic topics, so it is extremely broad. The resolutions may ask for a particular issue to be studied, create a program for residents, medical students, ask the AANS or CNS to do a specific task. These resolutions can go in just countless directions. So they direct the actions of the CSNS with both the AANS and CNS. So if a resolution is passed, it requires the CSNS to act upon it, depending on what it is. And adopted resolutions are binding to the CSNS. They're what we call advisory to the AANS and CNS, so we can't compel them to do things, but we can advise and ask them to do certain things. And it's informational to all the state societies that may be pushing these issues up to the forefront of neurosurgery via the CSNS. It may be generated by any member of a state neurologic or neurosurgical society, any member of the AANS, CNS. But actually, the submission, so the resolution can be created, but to be actually submitted, it has to be submitted by a delegate of the CSNS. So as those people who would be considered delegates would be appointees for the AANS and CNS caucuses. I'm a CNS caucus appointee. Any elected representative from a state society, or as resident fellows, you are official delegates to the CSNS, so you would be able to formally submit a resolution proposal. So like I said, these resolutions have brought a ton of different ideas and topics to the forefront of debate for policy changes. Some of the things that we have had debated in the CSNS plenary session over the last just few years, things like domestic violence and its neurosurgery's role in helping with that, gun violence, telemedicine, trauma from the border wall, diversity, equity, and inclusion ideas. So a lot of different things come up at this meeting through the resolution process. So, oops, I'm gonna go ahead. So resolution ideas can really come from anywhere. Issues you've seen in your hospital or practice, questions that you really feel need to be answered, or ideas that you want to come up with or come to fruition. So I think one of the things that really spurs some of the most interesting and well-regarded resolutions are things that come up just in your daily practice, things you say, you know what we deal with all the time? Oh, this sucks. I wonder why we do this. What's a better way? And usually if it's coming up in whatever institution or location you're at and you start talking about it, I almost guarantee you other people around the country feel or find very similar problems. And that can be a great genesis of ideas. And when they're brought up from specific instances in your practice, they usually get a lot of traction if they're well written and done. So once the idea for a resolution has been generated, it needs to be written out, but it follows a relatively strict format and process to make sure that these are done quality and in a quality way, and that we can kind of do them in an organized fashion. So this is an actual resolution that was submitted by our immediate past or two cycles ago, one of our fellows, and Jason Stacy, who is a member of the executive committee. He is the chair of the medical legal committee. So this is a resolution fall of 2022, so just a couple of years ago. And this is what a resolution would look like in its completed form. Resolutions have several key parts. They have a title. They have information about who has submitted the resolution. There's a lot of other stuff that kind of gets off about that we've added of who the contacting or corresponding authors are and things like that. But that's not really necessary to talk about in this part. Here we want to talk about the two main portions of the resolution that occur, and they are basically a rationale and a resolve. So the rationale section presents supporting evidence for the actions requested or desired by the authors in the resolution. It's essentially an argument or justification for the actions that they want done. It should list the most prominent or pertinent information that would lead and support the actions requested. And it should be succinct and complete and convincing. The wording of the rationale sections follow a very formalized pattern. You'll see it here. Each supportive statement, idea, or paragraph begins with a whereas, followed by a complete thought, which should be kind of separate and individual. And if multiple whereases are required, you can see here they have 3 of them in this resolution. We do this so that we have a concise idea of why this is important and um, and what it needs to be done. Then we come in with a be it resolved clause that says, and this is basically what the authors of the resolution would like to have accomplished. So in this particular resolution, they are asking for the CSNS to provide a guide for neurosurgery trainees who may be involved in a malpractice claim, and kind of they list these things out. Um, as I said, there's a lot of kind of other things that we put in here. One of the things that we check is things like particular references, maybe for the whereases for support of these. We have a process where we check and make sure this resolution hasn't been submitted, the last 3 meetings and failed every time. So we're not kind of debating the same things and rehashing things. Sometimes that's okay, and sometimes it's allowed, but a lot of times we try to avoid hitting the same thing over and over, especially if it's not gotten any traction. So with the writing, as I said, we have a specific format, but there is a process with the resolution creation. Once a resolution has been created and written, it must be submitted through the CSNS website at least 6 weeks prior to the meeting. And there will be an email that is sent out by Sandy from the corresponding secretary, and they will ask for basically saying, this is the deadlines, these are when it needs to be submitted by. Once the resolutions are submitted, they are reviewed by the executive committee, and they are, we've had a little change in the process, but basically there's a committee that will look at the resolutions. They may, if similar, these resolutions are very similar, may combine them or ask the authors to work together to make a joint proposal rather than having debate on basically the exact same topic at different points. They will, the EC can then group the resolutions together, maybe, one's dealing with similar topics, so the debates kind of come in a row. So they then, once they've kind of grouped these resolutions, they will assign them to different committees. They are typically assigned based on the content or subject of the resolution or who it impacts. So, for example, in the resolution dealing with the malpractice or legal training for the residents that we just had up there, that may be assigned to the medical legal committee based on subject matter. It might be assigned to the communications and education committee based on the fact that you're creating educational content, and it may also be assigned to the young neurosurgeons representative section because it affects trainees. So those committees who are assigned particular resolutions are expected to meet together and discuss all the resolutions that have been assigned to them. This is typically done prior to the meeting, and that's what we've really encouraged over the last several years as we've gotten more and more participation and more resolutions for each meeting. Doing a lot of this work and having a lot of these ideas concrete based on committee discussions prior to the meeting really helps us be very, very focused in our debates, get all the salient points and get everybody heard. When we debate these, the committees who are assigned to each of the resolutions are expected to give testimony. The CSNS has quadrants, which are made up of the state societies, and each of you will be assigned to a quadrant based on the states that you have or that you represent. Each quadrant is expected to comment on every resolution and provide testimony for that, and the AANS and CSNS caucuses are also expected to provide testimony on all resolutions. All right. So the resolution is typically done, or it is done, or the testimony is given, I'm sorry, at the plenary sessions, which occur during the meetings. This is kind of an outside shot of our plenary session. So we usually have about 100 to 150 members in the testimony sessions, or the plenary sessions, consisting of everyone from resident fellows to past fellows to appointees to the appointees for the caucuses to CNS and AANS leadership at these meetings. So they're very well attended. Typically, we have two plenary sessions, one on each day of the meeting. So during the first plenary session, the vice chair will introduce the resolutions and open testimony. Dr. Toomey Allen's on the call here tonight. So he will be the one that will be doing this at the meeting, because he is the vice president currently. Basically, he will often, if we have testimony which has been provided in written format prior to the meeting, he will post that and read it so everybody can see the support or thoughts from each of the committees. And then depending on kind of how many resolutions we have, sometimes the testimony will be given in written format and posted. Otherwise, once that has been posted, the floor will open up for testimony, and typically the authors of the resolution, or one of the authors of the resolution, will get up and say, you know, my name is Dr. Phelps and I wrote this resolution. I'm speaking on behalf of the authors. You know, gives usually a 30-second to 1 minute summary of why they feel it's important, and why they feel it should be done. And then the mic gets opened up for other individual members or committees that may want to come up and place their thoughts on this, have debate and say, well, hey, maybe we've done this already, or things like that. So then there gets to be testimony back and forth. During the plenary session, they will have a group of selected delegates. You can kind of see on the right-handed picture there. I don't know if my mouse picks it up, but right down here, there are several people sitting at this front table, and they are called the reference committee, and they play a special role of collecting the testimony, and with the vice chair, after the meeting, after the plenary sessions, get together and they can collate the testimony, and they will kind of look at the general consensus for each of these resolutions. Sometimes they will then come back and say, or then they will come back and kind of put that evening, that after the first meeting, they'll come back and put a recommendation out there that basically the reference committee, for example, may recommend that this resolution is accepted as written. They may come back and say, or, they may say, well, hey, the majority of testimony was in favor of this. There was, really not a lot of concern or question, something that's feasible. They may say, we would recommend rejection of this resolution, rationale being everybody was against it. We don't know that it's a feasible project. They may kind of combine and collate a lot of these ideas that have been presented in the testimony and say, the resolution's okay, but we think it kind of should maybe they alter the format of it a little bit, or make some changes based on the testimony, based on what all is said in the plenary session. And these recommendations are emailed out to the body. The second morning at the plenary session, the vice chair then introduces the resolutions as altered by the reference committee, and provides a rationale for the recommendation. It opens up to testimony again for the quadrants and the caucuses. And then eventually, as the testimony is completed, voting begins on the resolutions. And if it gets a little bit into some of the rules of order for things, but basically, if a resolution is passed and is put forth and passed, It will go through. If it's rejected, it basically dies at that point. If it is passed, what it will do is be taken to the EC and then assigned to a committee to work on that resolution. That may be something like we want, if the resolution says we want the CSNS to write a letter to the AANS asking for, increased spots for residents, in their programs. We, here will do that. It may be assigned to a committee, for example, medical legal committee, medical practices committee, coding and reimbursement, depending on what the topic is. Sometimes it's assigned jointly to multiple committees to work together. And that allows us to get the work done. So we encourage every resident fellow to be involved in the resolution process. And we would like everyone to at least create one resolution. So the first step is really to get an idea. So there's lots of ways to do that. Some people just, they can just rip out 5 or 6 ideas at a time. That's great. Some people, they got to mull it around a little bit. What I would always encourage is, think about problems you have and say, well, what's the solution to that? And maybe that's our generation or genesis for a resolution. I would recommend discussing it with, a mentor, a colleague. They don't even have to be part of the CSNS, committee members, things like that. The idea is you're trying to find things that can be improved or, create things and make them better. So, it's pretty easy to find problems. We can all sit around the water cooler and gripe about lots of stuff all the time. So sometimes it's just a good idea to say, well, what can I do to make that better? Or what would I be interested in learning about? Talking with a mentor, especially someone in the CSNS as you begin the resolution process is, I think, very important because those of us who've been in the organization a long time basically have experience in maybe ways of framing a resolution. We can see potential pitfalls that will happen in a testimony, in a plenary session where people are going to get hung up, what they're going to be upset about. We can say, the resolution, that's maybe too broad. It's asking for too much. Like, for example, some people will say, write a resolution that requires the AANS to pay for X, Y, or Z. We can't require the AANS to do anything. We have to ask them if they would. So it's a matter of, kind of phrasing things correctly so that we remove any block or hang up that we have in getting your idea passed and moving forward. So once you have your idea and you've kind of got this started, there's a specific way to submit it, and that is on the website. You have to, I'm sure you will get, if you have not already, your sign in for the website. But in the website, there is a really nice place to submit the resolutions that are created. It walks you down kind of all the check boxes you have to you go through. This is actually a screenshot of the submission page. So you can see their title, authors. It talks about that you have to look at all prior resolutions. We talked about that. You have to disclose conflicts of interest. You have to follow the resolution guidelines, which are all there and available. It talks about a fiscal note, which is how much this is going to cost. So once everything's completed, you can put it and submit it. There are fantastic guidelines that were written by Gary Simmons and Randy Smith and Joe Chang that really walk you through. It's kind of like the super long version of my talk. They just walk you through, this is the way we do it. This is why we do it. This is how we do it. These are good examples. These are bad examples. So I would encourage you, as you develop ideas, to sit down for 5 or 10 minutes and just read that resolution guidelines section on the website. It's a huge amount of information. And it goes, if you follow those guidelines, it will go a long way in helping you get your resolutions passed. So I wanted to end this just with a few little pearls about the resolution process. I am going to say, I'll put the disclaimer on that, these are my thoughts, and, other members may not hold to them, but these are just kind of things that I kind of feel with the resolutions. So one good way to get support for and a resolution passed is to get support from multiple committees or multiple authors. If you have one author or 1 to 2 authors that submit something, that's good. But if you have a committee that supports this, you've already got 30 votes on your side. If you have 2 committees putting it through, say it's a medical, legal, and medical practice joint submission, you already have like a huge chunk of your resolution almost passed. So I think multiple authors and support is a very good thing. It also allows you to have several people kind of look over that, look for pitfalls, look for potential hangups, and address those before they, pop up and rear their ugly head on the debate floor, because some really good resolutions have been, torpedoed on the debate floor, maybe because they weren't very clear in their expectations or their desires. So, looking for committee support's a good way to do that. Now, one of the things I will say though too is, the support should be meaningful. It's kind of a more recent phenomenon here is, everybody wants to be on everybody's resolution, and the resolutions don't count on your CV. So just getting your name attached to 40 resolutions is not very helpful. It's much better to really, if you're going to get one, be a part of it, help develop it. Don't just kind of get your name slapped on there for the sake of having your name slapped on there. It's not really a good look. And people do it for publications, but again, these aren't publicized or published, so not necessary to do that. Be thoughtful in what you ask for, because you have to kind of be realistic. Like if you say, we want organized neurosurgery to send out a proclamation to the Supreme Court saying we should ban all guns in the U.S. or mandate that nobody drives a motorcycle, that has zero traction, and it's kind of wasting people's time to put that forth to some degree. If you're asking the CSNS to do a traveling fellowship at a cost of $200,000 a year, it's going to be dead on arrival. It's going to sound good, but it's just not going to get any traction. You have to be thoughtful about cost. Every resolution should have a fiscal note. So if you're doing a resolution that says something like, we would like to study the effects of a particular new policy on something, where we're going to send out a survey, we're going to do literature search and things like that, really not a whole lot of cost with that. If you were saying, we want to create a traveling fellowship at a cost of $5,000 a year, again, there's a cost. And it's one thing to have a one-time cost. It's another thing to have a recurring cost, because, our organization, we have a budget. We have, in today's age, the budgets are tight, and we're always looking for ways to save a penny or two. And, pulling out a recurring thing of $4,000 or $5,000 a year, or even $2,000 or $3,000 a year, can be very difficult. So, once the difficulty is once these are, accepted and passed, we're compelled to do this through the bylaw. So it makes some difficulties sometimes trying to juggle the ability to get these done through the CSNS. So that's my little treasurer hat right there. Please be thoughtful about cost. And if you have a question, just kind of ask, because, some things you can maybe do in a much cheaper way, and some things, may have a lot of costs that you don't realize are there. So when you put forth a resolution, sometimes they will fail. and that is okay. The resolution I put forward, I think when I was a resident fellow, crashed and burned. It was a disaster. But that's okay. And it's okay for a lot of reasons. Sometimes, to be honest with you, you will have an idea that's ahead of its time, and that just neurosurgery is not ready for it. We can go back and look at a lot of these things with like advanced practice providers. 15 years ago, that came up and it was immediately shut down. No. And now, over the time, that's developed into a thing where it's, those are an integral part of most of our practices. Sometimes when you put that idea forth, it's really good because it kind of starts a seed in other people's heads that, a year or two later, the idea like blossoms. And we've seen that with some of the programs we've had, especially for residents and medical student education. We've had some people who are very interested and very supportive of that have put forth resolutions that have gotten shot down. And then 2 or 3 years later, they come back with almost a very similar resolution. And by that time, people are like, yeah, that's a great idea. We've seen that those seeds planted that come to fruition in organizations like WINS, the Women in Neurosurgery. We've had some things put forth in the CSNS where a few years later, that comes to fruition because some of the leaders from the CSNS were in, leadership in WINS as well. And those things have been brought forth and made good. Sometimes things that are very important to you may not be that important to others, and that's okay. I think part of the idea here is one of the wonderful things about the resolution process is it does give voice to people. And just because you have a voice doesn't mean your ideas get accepted every time, but to be able to have that ability to at least express things that you're concerned about, express things that you think can make our specialty better is a wonderful thing about the resolution process. So that's all the slides I have. I think I'm going to kind of echo the words of that resolution primer and discussion from Joe and the other writers. It says the better the resolutions, the better the agenda, the more productive the meeting. So so I would encourage you each to be thoughtful of potential resolutions, be active and involved in that, read those guidelines, seek help, because we know this is the first time you're doing this. It's a kind of a different thing that you may not be extremely used to, but it's a really neat thing once you get involved with it. And I'm going to close up with that and turn it back to the group. I think at this point,
and I think just like learning to ride a horse or learning to do a thrombectomy or a discectomy, the best thing to do is get involved, get in there and get your hands dirty.
Any of you guys working on resolutions? Got something that's brewing? See some nods. What kind of guidance do you think you would need to be able to say, okay, what do you have access to the previous deck of resolutions that were considered in the spring, in the fall? Okay, we can fix that. I think that's a very good place to start.